Betrayal in marriage, betrayed wife, revealed lover, controversial cohabitation, marital secret, family scandal, exposed infidelity, controversial decision, modern relationships, love triangle, destroyed home, unlikely forgiveness, emotional, impact, real outburst, living with a lover, overcoming pain, life as a threesome, female courage, love and hurt, unexpected ending. Have you ever heard of a wife and a mistress who decided to live together? It sounds crazy, right? But this true story will show you that when the truth comes out, the reaction is not always what the world expects. Sometimes what starts with betrayal, hurt, and anger ends in something even more unexpected, living together. And that's exactly what happened to Stefany and Jenny, two women who should hate each other, but ended up sharing the same roof after a scandal that shook everything up. Stefany had been married to Jonathan for almost 8 years. They had a small daughter, a peaceful routine, and a seemingly stable life. But like so many other women, Stefany felt that something had changed. Small signs, the different smell on his clothes, the excuses that didn't add up, the coldness in his eyes. Deep down, she knew. The confirmation came in the worst way. She found out. And with names, photos, messages. It wasn't just an adventure. It was Jenny, a woman who was already too present, not only in Jonathan's life, but in a way, in hers as well. What Stefany did next was not what many people expected. She didn't explode. She didn't let it out. She wanted to understand. And that's when the impossible happened. This is not a story about easy forgiveness. It is a story about difficult choices, about courage, about women who, even when betrayed, even when hurt, decided to face the truth with open eyes, even if that meant opening the door to their home, to their lover. And now I ask you, what would you do in Stefany's place? Comment below. Your opinion may help someone who is going through something similar. Like, share and subscribe to the channel, because what comes next in this story is as strong as it is unexpected.
Hello, my name is Stefany, and until recently, I thought I knew who I was. I thought I was a strong woman, independent, a present wife, an attentive mother, and above all, someone who had built a family. I saw my life as a puzzle where everything seemed, at least on the outside, in place. But the truth was there all the time, staring at me from the corner of the room, whispering things I didn't want to hear. I started to suspect Jonathan on a random Tuesday. He had been acting strange for days. He was using his phone too much, laughing, quietly at odd hours, making up commitments that didn't exist before. But what destroyed me wasn't his behavior. It was his neglect. The way he started to look at me as if I was just a shadow of the woman he once loved. As if his presence in the house was a burden. As if our story had expired. At first, I tried not to believe it. We always try, right? We cling to excuses. We cling to the fear of being right. I blamed myself. I thought maybe I was exaggerating. It's just a phase, I repeated. He is tired of work. I was constantly making up excuses while my heart screamed for a truth I didn't want to hear. But I heard. It was early in the morning. He was sleeping next to me, breathing heavily, calm as if the world were at peace. And I couldn't do it. I grabbed his cell phone. The password was the same, and that gave me a glimmer of hope, as if he was innocent for not hiding it. But maybe he was just sure that I would never have the courage. But I did. The messages were there. a sea of conversations with a certain Jenny. At first I thought she was just another random person, but as I read them, I realized she wasn't just a lover. She was a presence in his life, a regular presence, a routine. There were inside jokes, nicknames, photos. There were even comments about me, about how trapped he felt, about how she understood him in a way I no longer did. I remember the taste of vomit rising in my throat. I remember my hands shaking, the sound of my cell phone falling to the floor, and him waking up scared, asking what was happening. I couldn't speak. I just cried. And he knew, right away. He didn't try to deny it. He just sat on the edge of the bed and ran his hand over his face, as if it was all inevitable, as if he had already prepared himself for that moment. "You saw everything, right?" he asked. I shook my head. "I'm sorry," he said. But he didn't cry. He didn't kneel. He didn't apologize. He just looked at me with that look on his face that says he knows he's destroyed something and has already accepted the price. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break everything. But my daughter was sleeping in the next room, and I didn't want her world to come crashing down along with mine. So I stayed silent. And that silence was the loudest I've ever been in my life. In the days that followed, I isolated myself. Jonathan was still at home, but it was as if he had already left. He barely spoke. I did the same. The only thing I could think about was Jenny. Who was she? How had she come into my life without permission? I found her Instagram. I saw photos, videos. I saw smiles he knew. I saw the face he touched. She was an ordinary woman. Beautiful, yes, but ordinary. And that hurt even more, because she wasn't better than me. She was just someone else. Why her? One day, I looked her up. I wrote a message. I deleted it. I wrote it again. I deleted it. But I needed to know who this woman was who had come into my home. So I wrote something simple. "You know who I am. I just want to talk, woman to woman." She replied the same day, politely, with respect. I wasn't expecting that. The image I had of her was that of an unscrupulous homewrecker. But the woman who replied seemed human, and that unnerved me. We arranged to meet at a discreet cafe. I went with sweaty palms and a racing heart. And when I saw her, I felt angry, but I also felt curious. She seemed nervous, like she was, as vulnerable as I was. She spoke first. She said she never wanted to get involved with a married man, that Jonathan said he was separated, that our marriage was a facade, that he said he only hadn't left home yet because of his daughter. I had heard this kind of excuse before, but there was something in her voice that made me doubt if she really knew the truth. I cried. She cried. And the conversation lasted for hours. She wasn't the monster of my imagination. She was just a woman who was also being deceived. I left that cafe not knowing what to feel. Jonathan had betrayed two people, not just one, and in different ways. I was betrayed as a wife. She was betrayed as a lover who believed she was being loved honestly. The next few weeks were filled with emotional chaos. Jonathan moved away. He said he needed to think, that he had done everything wrong, but it was too late. I no longer wanted to understand him. I wanted to understand myself. Who was I without him? Who did I want to be after the destruction? And it was during this period of new beginnings that I started talking to Jenny again. not out of anger, nor out of revenge. But because of all people, she was the only one who understood exactly what I was feeling. Yes, the story is absurd, but real life is full of absurdities that no one writes about. And I experienced one of them. Jenny and I started texting, then calling, then short visits, and then came the proposal no one would have expected. We were drinking coffee on my porch, talking about how cruel life had been to us, and she said, "Have you ever thought about trying something different, supporting each other, living together for a while, not as rivals, but as women rebuilding? What's left?" I laughed. At first, it sounded crazy, but today I no longer know what madness is, because sometimes madness is continuing in a world that destroyed you, and courage is choosing what no one would dare to choose. If you've made it this far, take a deep breath with me. Would you have the courage to look into the face of your husband's lover and see an ally in her? Comment below, like and share this story if it made you feel something. This is just the beginning. When Jenny proposed to me, I felt like I was staring into an abyss. Living with my husband's mistress? It seemed like a cruel irony for my life. But I also felt an enormous desire to get out of the hole I was in. That idea, so absurd, opened a door to something new, unexpected. I confess that the first night she spent here was tense. I observed her every gesture, every word, every silence. It was strange to share the same roof with the woman who, until recently, was an invisible intruder in my house, a shadow that I didn't even really know. Jenny, on the other hand, looked as lost as I felt. She wasn't sure where this was going, but at the same time, there was a relief in her eyes, as if sharing the burden of this betrayal was a way to survive. She was the one who suggested a sort of contract, ground rules for living together, so that neither of us would get hurt any more than we already were. I remember how we started to build our routine. In the morning, I would take my daughter to school. She would stay in the kitchen making coffee. The house still carried that smell of distrust. But as the days went by, that smell began to be replaced by frank conversations, shared tears, and laughter that would come at unlikely moments. It's strange to say this, I know. Who would have thought that two women united by the pain of the yai, same man, could find a kind of friendship? But it happened, and it wasn't easy. At first, I felt like a traitor to my own pain. How could I be friends with a woman who, even if she didn't know it, had a hand in my downfall? Jenny also struggled with this silent guilt, the kind that doesn't show itself in words, but hurts in the eyes. The experience was eye-opening. I met a Jenny that no one would have ever imagined, a kind woman full of broken dreams who liked poetry books, who was afraid of failing. She wasn't the villain of the story, at least not only that. She was a wounded woman trying to understand herself amidst the chaos that our man had caused. Jonathan? He was left out during this whole process. I don't know if it was out of shame or fear of facing what he did. He showed up a few times, tried to talk, asked for forgiveness, but his presence felt like a dead weight in our house. And that's where things got even more complicated. Over time, Jenny and I began to realize that resentment and anger no longer had any place between us. Not that we forget the past, but we choose not to be victims of it. Of course, there were moments of explosion, screams, accusations, tears that came from the depths of the soul. But there were also reconciliations, and it was in this process that I began to understand what it meant to forgive. Not forgiving Jonathan. That would be too much for me. But forgiving myself for allowing that man to dominate my life for so long. Forgiving Jenny for falling in love with him without knowing the consequences. One day, on a cold night, sitting in the living room, Jenny said something that stayed with me. Maybe we need to be more than two betrayed women. Maybe we need to be proof that it is possible to transform pain into strength. And that's when everything changed. The idea of living together, which at first seemed absurd, became a life project. We started thinking about plans that didn't involve Jonathan. We talked about independence, about dreams that each of us had abandoned. I went back to studying, taking care of myself, seeing myself with different eyes. Jenny, too. Living together made us stronger. I began to realize that we could rebuild a life, but not the one that had been stolen, but a new one, built by us. Of course, it wasn't a bed of roses. There were days when I wanted to disappear, when I felt a huge longing for the life I thought I had. There were days when Jenny cried because of the uncertain future. There were days when Jonathan tried to get closer, but the door was already closed. I learned that we don't need people who hurt us to be happy. That self-love can be more powerful than the pain of betrayal. That sisterhood between women can be a shield against the worst storms. Today, Jenny and I share not only the house, but the strength to move forward. We are two women who decided not to let betrayal defeat us, who chose to be the protagonists of our own story. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that this unlikely union saved our lives. And perhaps this is the greatest proof that even in the most desperate situations, hope can blossom. If you're out there on the other side, going through similar pain, I want you to know that you're not alone. That sometimes the unexpected can be the path to healing. I'd like to know what you think of this story so far. Have you ever imagined sharing your life with someone who, in theory, would be your enemy? Comment below. Leave a like if this confession touched you, and share it so that more people can hear that, even in chaos, there is strength to start over. Jenny and I, from rivals, began to build an unlikely coexistence. Today, I want to tell you about the ups and downs of this journey, about how the weight of the past insists on bringing us down, even when we try to move forward. The house where we live together is far from being a perfect home. It is a space of encounters and disagreements, of learning and confrontations, where contradictory feelings arise every day. Deep down, we weren't enemies just because of Jonathan, but because we were placed on the same stage, forced to share a place that carried so much pain. I remember an episode that left a deep impression on me. It was a cold Sunday, and I had planned a lunch for my daughter and Jenny as a way of showing that, despite everything, I wanted this relationship to work out. But, in the middle of the afternoon, a banal comment made by Jenny ended up triggering an argument that seemed to never end. She spoke, without realizing the wound she would open, about the way Jonathan used to treat her, how he had promised her the world and, in the end, always left her alone. It was as if the pain she carried suddenly came to the surface, and, along with it, my own pain, which still burned deeper than I admitted. I lost control. The words that came out of my mouth were harsh, perhaps more so than they should have been. I accused Jenny of being the cause of it all, of stealing the life I believed I would have. I said things I never imagined I would say to someone who, deep down, was as hurt as I was. She didn't respond in kind. She remained silent, taking a deep breath, and looked at me with a sadness that broke my heart. It was at that moment that I realized that the war we were waging would lead us nowhere. In that silence, I felt a kind of redemption, a chance to rebuild what was falling apart. I decided I needed to apologize, not just for her sake, but for myself. I was allowing myself to be a victim, but I didn't want to live like that anymore. In the days that followed, we had long conversations where we shared our fears, regrets, and hopes. I discovered that Jenny had dreams that not even Jonathan could erase. She wanted to be an artist, but she gave it all up because of her troubled relationship. I told her that after the wedding, my own identity had been lost amidst the role of wife and mother, and that only now was I beginning to find myself again. This exchange was fundamental. It was as if, by opening ourselves up to each other, we broke down the barriers that the past had built between us. But of course, not everything was rosy. Jonathan continued to be a shadow that hung over our lives. He would come every now and then with apologies, promises, trying to regain control. I felt angry and deeply sad when he showed up, because I knew that even he didn't know exactly what he wanted. Jenny and I had to be firm. We said that we would no longer accept being victims of his choices, that our relationship had nothing to do with him, and that we deserved peace. This firmness strengthened us, but it also exposed us. Jonathan's family was shocked to learn that we were living together. For them, it was a scandal, an affront. I received suspicious looks, judgments, and malicious comments. Many did not understand how I could live with my husband's lover, much less allow her to live in the same house as my daughter. These looks and comments were a constant reminder that the world around us was not ready to accept this new dynamic. I felt at that moment that we were creating something far beyond what we imagined. It wasn't just about forgiveness or coexistence, but about breaking patterns, challenging what society considers acceptable. It was hard, I won't lie. I had doubts, fears, and days when I wanted to give up on everything. But the strength I found in sisterhood with Jenny was greater than all of that. It was a silent alliance that gave us the courage to face the judgment of others and, most importantly, our own internal judgment. During this process, I had to learn to deal with contradictory feelings. Sometimes I felt jealous, angry, and even afraid of losing the little that I was rebuilding. Other times, I felt gratitude for having by my side a person who, despite all the pain, chose to walk with me and not against me. Jenny and I began to plan for the future more concretely. We talked about starting a business together, something that would be ours, that would give us independence and a purpose. It was a project that united us and gave meaning to everything we had experienced. My daughter, who initially found the situation very strange, gradually got used to it. Jenny made sure to respect her space and even created a special bond with my little girl, something I never imagined was possible. This bond made me realize that, despite everything, we were building a new family, a different family, marked by overcoming and courage. Sure, I still have my moments of weakness. Sometimes, I find myself thinking about what could have been, about the promises that were broken, about the trust that was lost. But I choose not to let those thoughts paralyze me. Now I understand that happiness does not depend on external circumstances, but on the way we choose to face life and our pain. What about you? Have you ever imagined yourself in a situation where pain can turn into strength? Where what seemed impossible suddenly becomes a chance to start over? Tell me in the comments. If this story touched you, like it and share it so that more people know that, even in the midst of chaos, it is possible to find light. Living with Jenny changed me in ways I never imagined possible. I expected to just survive what happened, swallow the betrayal, and try to be strong for my daughter. But in the midst of this turmoil, I found something that surpasses all the pain I felt. When she arrived at the house, the first thing I thought was, this isn't going to work. We'll never be able to live under the same roof, especially after everything. I felt a mix of anger, hurt, and fear. Fear of what people would think, fear of what this might mean for my family, fear even for myself. But something told me I had to try, as crazy as it sounded. At first, the days were too silent, with looks that weighed like stones. Neither of us spoke much. I felt my soul tear into pieces every time she walked down the hall. But there was a strange curiosity there, a desire to understand who this woman was who had stolen my husband. Jenny, on the other hand, was far from the image of a lover that I had in my head. She was a tired woman, full of invisible wounds, but also with a strength that frightened me. Little by little, we broke down barriers, sharing stories, confidences that neither of us expected to share. I remember one night when I broke down. I sat on the couch in the living room, my head in my hands, suffocated by a weight I couldn't explain. Jenny approached me slowly, with a look that didn't judge, just understood. She sat next to me, without saying anything, and we sat there in silence, two women marked by the same betrayal, trying to find some meaning in that chaos. It was there that I realized that our relationship would not be that of enemies. Maybe it was a chance to give new meaning to everything that had happened, an attempt to create a new story, even if it was uncomfortable, even if the world didn't understand. Living together on a daily basis brought challenges that I hadn't anticipated. We had to learn to deal with our limits, our pains, and our expectations. Things weren't always harmonious. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and times when I thought about giving up. But every time I looked at my daughter and saw how much she needed stability, I felt like I couldn't back down. Jenny showed herself to be a woman who wanted to rebuild her own life, not dependent on Jonathan, not held hostage by the betrayal that brought us together. She began seeking therapy, courses, projects that would make her feel alive again. And I, in turn, tried to reconnect with that Stefany who existed before everything, who had dreams and desires that I had buried in order to be the perfect wife. Over time, our relationship evolved into something more complex and true. We found a kind of respect and even affection, a coexistence that does not erase the past, but tries not to be defined by it. Of course, this didn't erase the pain, nor the jealousy, nor the insecurities that sometimes arise, like waves that threaten to drown any attempt at peace. But I learned that it is possible to live with these feelings without letting them destroy everything. Jonathan's family still doesn't understand our choice. I often feel the weight of disapproving looks, of whispered words behind my back, of the judgment that seems to never end. But I have decided that for myself and for my daughter, we will move forward, doing the best we can. Jenny and I started working together on a project that gave us a new purpose. We created a small online store where we sell crafts and items that represent our story of overcoming. This brought us closer together, giving meaning to what seemed like nothing more than pain. Sometimes I find myself thinking about how life is full of surprises and twists and turns. I never imagined that the woman who was once my greatest enemy would become such an important ally. It made me question what family, love, and forgiveness really mean. But despite the progress, I still carry the wound of betrayal, the memory of sleepless nights, broken promises, and the feeling of abandonment still haunts me. And I know that Jenny also has her own internal battles to face. Ultimately, this coexistence forced us to grow, to look within and confront our own limitations. It's not easy and it's not always fair, but it's real. I would like to know what you think of this story so far. Do you believe that two women who share the pain of the same betrayal can really live together and even help each other? Or do you think that is impossible? Tell me in the comments. Your support makes all the difference so that I can continue to share this journey with you. Living with Jenny continued to be a daily exercise in patience, discovery, and, above all, internal challenges that I never imagined I would have to face. At first, the mere idea of sharing the same roof with someone I considered my enemy made me want to run away, disappear, erase from my life everything that hurt me. But reality set in, and I had to face the fact that my suffering would not go away just because I wanted it to with all my strength. There was a constant tension in the air, looks that crossed the room suspiciously, unspoken words that filled the heavy silence between us. It was as if every gesture, every sigh carried an invisible weight that reminded us at every moment of what happened. And yet, there was something that surprised me. We tried to understand each other. Or maybe it was just the need to survive. This absurd situation, which united us through pain and separated us through resentment. I found myself watching Jenny at unexpected moments. She wasn't the cold, calculating person I imagined. Here was a fragile woman trying to rebuild herself from her own ruins, trying to understand why she had gotten herself involved in a story that had only brought her suffering. I knew she was suffering too, albeit in a different way. Her guilt, her shame, all of it was etched in her eyes. I saw in her a reflection of my own despair, and it confused me. Discussions began to arise, of course. We couldn't just pretend that everything was okay, that our pain didn't exist. There were times when words were sharp. They hurt more than any physical action. I remember an episode in which we had a disagreement over an object in the kitchen, something seemingly trivial, but which for me symbolized all the invasion I felt in that house. At that moment, I shouted things that I later deeply regretted, but which reflected the depth of my suffering. Jenny cried. For the first time, I saw genuine tears in her eyes, and it made me realize that behind the other woman was a real person with feelings, fears, and desires. She wasn't a monster. She was someone who, in some way, was also trying to survive the storm. In this turmoil, my daughter was my safe haven. She, with her innocence, did not understand the complications of adults, but she felt the heavy atmosphere and asked in a sweet little voice if everything would be okay. I was forced to hide my tears, to smile even when everything inside me was begging to fall apart. My responsibility was twofold: to take care of myself and to protect my little girl from that world that seemed to be falling apart. Jenny also showed a maternal side that I hadn't expected. She approached my daughter with care and affection, trying to build a relationship that I thought was impossible. And little by little, I realized that my resistance was also an obstacle to making that relationship work. After all, if I didn't give her a chance, everything would fall apart once and for all. As time went by, we began to develop a routine, a rhythm that began to seem less strange. We shared household chores, organized ourselves for our commitments, and even conversations began to take place, shy but real. We talked about our fears, our dreams, our frustrations. And it was precisely during these conversations that I realized how different we were, and at the same time, how similar we were. A turning point came when, on a rainy afternoon, we decided to sit down and talk, a conversation that could be the end or the beginning. We let everything out, the accumulated hurts, the guilt, the insecurities. It was painful, yes, but also liberating. I discovered that Jenny didn't want to be a part of my pain, that she also wanted to free herself from that situation and find a path to peace. From that moment on, we began to build something that no one could have ever imagined. A relationship based on respect and even mutual support. It was not a magical process, nor was it easy. There were setbacks, moments when everything seemed lost. But now there was a clear intention of not being enemies, but rather partners in rebuilding our lives. My family and close friends were shocked when they found out we were living together. Many judged, criticized, and pointed fingers. How can you live with your husband's mistress? Was the constant question. I didn't have an easy answer. I just knew that at that moment, it was what I needed to do to survive and preserve what was left of my family, especially my daughter. Jenny, in turn, was looking for her own path to healing. He underwent therapy, got involved in volunteer work, tried to reinvent himself away from the shadow of what we had experienced. I tried to do the same, even though sometimes I felt like I still carried an unbearable weight on my chest. Despite everything, I never stopped feeling a pang of pain when I saw Jonathan's gaze, my husband, which seemed torn between the two of us, trying to justify his choices and hide his regrets. It was never easy to face the betrayal, nor to accept that he had another woman living under the same roof, sharing moments, laughter, and pain. But something changed inside me. I understood that my life didn't have to be defined solely by betrayal or abandonment, that I could find strength in adversity, give new meaning to my pain, and even find humanity in what seemed impossible. Even though I can't forgive everything, and the scars are always there, deep and painful, I've learned to live with them without them consuming me completely. I've learned that sometimes forgiveness isn't an act of forgetting, but of accepting and moving on. This story is far from perfect. It is full of contradictions, mistakes, and moments when I thought everything would fall apart. But it is also a story of resistance, transformation, and love, even if it is a painful and complicated love. Now I want to know from you, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you be able to live with the person who once caused you the greatest pain? Or would you choose to run away and erase everything from your life? I really want to read your opinion in the comments. Your participation is essential for me and for everyone who follows this journey. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and share it so that more people can reflect on the nuances of love, betrayal, and overcoming. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take the opportunity to do so now, because real stories like this deserve to be told and heard. In the days that followed that conversation that seemed to have the power to transform everything, I thought that we were finally starting to breathe a little easier, Jenny and I. But life is not simple, and wounds, even when they begin to heal, still hurt, still burn. It was on one of those ordinary mornings that everything almost fell apart. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard the front door open. It was Jonathan, my husband, coming home early from work. My throat tightened, a mixture of anxiety and resentment taking over me. He had come from a tiring day, and I knew that the environment that awaited him was not ideal for anyone. Jenny was on the couch in the living room, reading a book with that serenity that I admired and hated at the same time. Jonathan exchanged a few words with me, something mechanical, almost cold. I could feel the weight of his guilt hanging in the air, like a dark cloud that threatened to collapse at any moment. Jenny stood up to greet him, and in that instant, the world seemed to shrink around us. It was a simple look, a restrained smile, but it carried meanings I never wanted to witness. It cut me like a sharp knife. I couldn't hold back the lump in my throat, the tightness in my chest any longer. Tears came, and I ran to my room, slamming the door behind me. I felt like everything was falling apart, that the fragile peace we had built was just an illusion. Jenny knocked on the door, but I didn't want to talk, not right now. I spent hours there, sitting on the floor, trying to control the storm inside me. It was hard to accept that my husband, whom I loved and trusted, still had something to hide, that there were deeper layers of betrayal that I didn't know about. My mind was spinning with unanswered questions, with doubts that consumed me. That night we decided to sit down again to talk. It was a tense conversation where the words came out with difficulty, full of hurt and distrust. Jonathan tried to explain himself, but his arguments sounded hollow, like excuses that didn't heal open wounds. Jenny was present, and despite the situation, she maintained a calm demeanor, almost as if she knew that that moment was crucial for all of us. I confessed my fear of losing not only my marriage, but also my identity. I felt torn between hate and love, between pain and the hope that something could be rebuilt. Jenny, in turn, revealed her own anguish, her deep guilt for having invaded a home that was not hers. It was a moment of raw honesty where we all exposed our vulnerabilities. As the days passed, the tensions did not disappear. There were times when living together seemed unbearable, and I thought several times about giving up on everything. But the presence of my daughter, the need to maintain some kind of stability for her, drove me to continue. And surprisingly, Jenny seemed to share that feeling of wanting to make it work, even if in an unusual way. We began to establish unwritten rules, small agreements that helped minimize conflicts. Mutual respect, individual spaces, clear boundaries. It was a hard learning process, full of setbacks, but little by little it created a less hostile environment. There was an afternoon when the three of us went out to a park. My daughter ran happily, oblivious to the adult dramas, and I could see Jenny smiling genuinely as she watched that scene. It was a simple moment, but it gave me a faint hope that we could find a way to coexist without so much suffering. Still, the ghosts of the past were ever present. Every call from Jonathan made my heart race. Every unanswered text was a reason for doubt and insecurity. I felt constantly on the edge of an emotional abyss, trying to balance what I wanted to believe and what I feared. It was then that something happened that changed the dynamic between us. Jenny found an old diary that I had left in the living room on impulse. In that diary, I had written moments of outburst, my deepest pains, my fears, and also some reflections on the betrayal. She read a few pages and, instead of walking away, came to me with a sincere apology, showing that she understood the extent of my suffering. From that episode on, we started to open up more to each other. We shared fears, dreams, and small everyday achievements. It was as if, despite the pain, we were building an invisible bridge that connected us in unexpected ways. However, the external judgment didn't stop. Family and friends didn't understand our choice, and I felt the weight of their critical gaze on me. Many told me to kick Jenny out of the house, to not allow that other woman to destroy my life once and for all. But I knew that reality was more complex than any simplistic judgment could understand. Jenny also suffered from this social isolation. She felt rejected, blamed, and this made her question her own existence. Together, we tried to face this shared loneliness, finding strength in each other to carry on. In the midst of this turmoil, my daughter continued to be the link that united us. The relationship between her and Jenny grew, and I realized that, despite everything, this unusual coexistence could have a positive side for my little girl. Jenny was there, not just as the other woman, but as someone who also cared about and loved my daughter. Still, I found myself in constant internal battles. Anger and resentment sometimes dominated my thoughts, making me doubt every decision I made. I wondered if it was really possible to overcome such a profound betrayal, if trust could be rebuilt, or if we were doomed to live trapped in this painful past. Through it all, one thing has become clear to me. Life doesn't follow linear paths. Love, pain, forgiveness, and resentment coexist in ways that defy logic. And perhaps in the end, the only thing we can do is choose how we deal with it all. Now, I really want to hear from you. How would you react if you had to share your life with someone who was once the source of your greatest pain? Do you think it is possible to find forgiveness and even friendship in the midst of so much suffering? Leave your comment. Your opinion is essential to continue this conversation. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to like it. Share it with anyone who needs to reflect on these human complexities, and subscribe to the channel to follow each chapter of this real and impactful journey. The days that followed that conversation were still marked by a roller coaster of emotions. But the peace we thought we were building was abruptly interrupted, like an unexpected gale that shakes the deepest roots of the trees. It wasn't long before new tensions, doubts, and confrontations arose that made us question everything again. That morning, I woke up with a strange feeling, a bad feeling that had been with me since the moment I opened my eyes. Jenny had already left for work, and Jonathan was still asleep, but the silence in the house seemed heavy, loaded with something I couldn't clearly identify. I decided to prepare breakfast for my daughter, trying my best to maintain routine and normality. But my mind kept spinning around the possible consequences of the coexistence we were trying to maintain. It was when I received a text message on my phone that everything started to fall apart again. A photo sent by an unknown number showed Jonathan and Jenny together, hugging, in a moment that to me seemed too intimate to be just friendship. That image burned my soul. Shock, anger, sadness. Everything came in simultaneous waves, leaving me dizzy. I couldn't control my tears as I stared at the photo. What was I doing there, trying to live with two people who were apparently still, hiding something from me? What did I have to put up with? My head was spinning in a whirlwind of thoughts and doubts. I decided to confront them both that very afternoon. When Jenny arrived, I could see that she sensed the tension in the air, the weight I was carrying. Without giving myself time to calm down, I showed him the photo. Her eyes filled with tears, but not with guilt. It was a mixture of fear and sadness that overflowed. Jonathan tried to explain himself, to say that there was nothing between them anymore, that it was all in the past, that I had to believe them. But the words sounded hollow. I couldn't hear anything but the noise of my pain. The atmosphere became tense, heavy. I felt small, insignificant in the face of that drama that seemed to never end. The walls of the house, which were supposed to be a refuge, seemed to close in around me as if I were trapped in an invisible prison. Over the next few weeks, the episodes of jealousy and arguments were constant. I found myself observing Jonathan and Jenny's every gesture, looking for signs that would assure me that I was still the wife, the woman they loved. But the more I looked, the more distant I felt. Jenny seemed more and more a part of my routine, my day-to-day life, and it consumed me. One afternoon, I had a nasty argument with Jenny. I was emotionally exhausted, and in a moment of loss of control, I ended up saying things that hurt, that wounded. Jenny didn't respond in kind. She just left the room with tears in her eyes. It was one of the first times I realized how much she was suffering too, how much that situation was a burden for all of us. Jonathan tried to mediate, but I often felt that he was more on her side than mine. This hurt me deeply, making me feel betrayed twice, by the extramarital affair and by the apparent silent alliance between the two. What hurt me the most was the lack of privacy, the constant feeling that I was just a piece on a board that I myself had not chosen to assemble. My days became a cycle of doubts, hurts, and frustrated attempts to maintain some normality for my daughter. It was then, on one of those difficult nights, when sadness seemed about to swallow me, that I received a message from an old friend. She noticed my absence and my silence and decided to reach out to me. This conversation made me realize that I needed to take care of myself, that I couldn't let my identity get lost in the midst of that chaos. I started going to therapy, a space where I could finally put into words everything I felt, without fear of judgment. That gave me the strength to face the dilemmas that were before me, to try to understand that my worth was not tied to the approval of others, nor to the approval of Jonathan or Jenny. Even so, things in the house remained tense. Forced coexistence brought to light issues that were not easy to resolve. There were times when I considered leaving that house that was both my home and my prison. But something kept me there. My daughter, the hope of rebuilding something, and perhaps a complex feeling I still held for Jonathan. Jenny, in turn, began to open up more to me. Our conversations gained depth, and I gradually realized that she was not just the woman who stole my husband, but a person with her own pain, fears, and regrets. This didn't erase everything, but it helped us build a less conflictual relationship. On the weekends, we tried to do something different to relieve the tension, taking my daughter to the park, having simple meals together, talking about trivial things. These were moments that gave me a breather, that made me believe that there was still room for hope. However, the ghosts of betrayal were always lurking. Every look exchanged between Jonathan and Jenny, every whispered word, made me doubt what I was experiencing. Insecurity corroded my soul. One of those afternoons during a conversation with Jenny, I finally asked her what she really wanted. If this relationship had a future, if there was a real possibility of rebuilding, or if we were just postponing the inevitable end. She replied with tears in her eyes that she didn't know for sure, but that she was willing to try. That he felt guilty, but also something he couldn't explain. That I wanted to be a part of my daughter's life, and that I wanted more than anything that we could find a way forward that didn't destroy everything. At that moment, I felt a mixture of compassion and confusion. It was not easy to accept that love could take such unexpected forms, that forgiveness could be a painful and constant choice. But there was no turning back. Life had put us in that situation, and the only thing we could do was face reality, day after day, without guarantees, with fear, but also with the hope that we still had left. And you? How would you react when faced with such a complex scenario? Do you think it is possible to live with someone who once caused so much pain? Share your opinion. Your comment may help other people who are going through similar situations. I woke up that morning with a weight on my chest that seemed impossible to carry. I knew that this would be the decisive day, the day when everything we had lived, felt, and endured would be put to the ultimate test. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, and the forced coexistence with Jenny and Jonathan had drained me more than I could have imagined. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't just run away from all of this, not after so much time and so much history between us. As I made coffee, the silence of the house seemed to scream in my head. Jenny was in her room, packing her things to leave. My daughter played in the living room, oblivious to the storm unfolding in the lives of the adults around her. I sat at the table, trying to organize the words I needed to say, words that could change everything, forever. When Jenny appeared, something in her expression made me realize that she, too, felt the weight of what was to come. There was no need for much conversation at that moment. I knew that what we had built up to that point, however fragile it was, had reached a breaking point. I took a deep breath and said everything I felt, every hurt, every fear, every doubt that consumed me. I talked about the pain of betrayal, about the feeling of being torn between two women who loved the same man, and about how difficult it was to try to accept a situation that seemed too absurd to be real. Jenny didn't interrupt me. She just listened, her eyes brimming with tears, and when I finished, she spoke with a sincerity that surprised me. "Stefany, I never wanted to destroy you. I love Jonathan, yes, but I'm also afraid of what this whole story will leave behind. I don't want to be your enemy. I don't want our daughter to feel this tension. I want to try, if you let me, to find a different way of living together, not only for the child, but for us." That confession left me speechless, because deep down, I also wanted to believe that it was possible, that even in the midst of so much chaos, there was still room for hope. But I knew it wouldn't be easy, much less simple. So we decided to sit down and make a plan. A commitment to peaceful coexistence with clear limits and mutual respect. Jonathan, in turn, committed to being honest, to no longer hiding anything, and to helping maintain the harmony we all needed to move forward. The first few days were tense, full of small disagreements and misunderstandings. But little by little, that strange dynamic began to take shape, and an unexpected coexistence began to emerge. The house, which once seemed like a battlefield, was transformed into a place where respect and tolerance began to coexist. Jenny and I, despite our difficulties, began to understand each other better, to recognize our pain, and to accept that, in some way, we were partners in this new phase. My daughter, despite all the confusion, seemed happy, and for me, that was enough. But not everything was perfect. There were times when insecurity came back with a vengeance, when the memories of the betrayal still weighed heavily on me, and I questioned whether I was really prepared for this. And that's when I understood something fundamental. Forgiveness is not a one-time act. It's a daily process, a constant choice, even when my heart still hurts. I learned to live with my wounds, to embrace my vulnerability, and to accept that love can take forms that society often doesn't understand. Today, looking back, I know that the decision to live this unusual experience transformed me profoundly. It made me stronger, more aware of myself, and above all, it taught me that love, even when flawed and painful, can be a force for reconstruction. I know that many will judge, question, and even condemn this story. But for me, Stefany, it was the most real journey I have ever experienced. And if you are going through something similar, know that you are not alone. I would like to know, do you think it is possible to live with someone who once hurt you so deeply? What limits would you set? Leave your comment. Your opinion may help other people who face similar dilemmas. If this story touched you, don't forget to like it, share it with those who need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel to follow other real and moving stories. Thank you for following me this far. In the next chapters, I will bring more stories that challenge common understanding, stories that prove that love and pain walk side by side. See you soon.